Well, NPM yet again was hacked, and this is not the first time. We have seen this story in the past as well, but it keeps on happening. Something needs to change, and this time the attack vector includes bun as a runtime as well. So let's get into what happened exactly through this blog post that I just discovered, which is where GitLab says that it has discovered a widespread NPM supply chain attack. So what this attack effectively means is it's a Shai Hulud malware, which was there on September this year as well, right? So this is not something which is unique. So this one is an evolved version of that same malware, right? Including a dead man switch. What this basically means, a dead man switch, if you're not aware about what this term means, is basically means that it's sort of the reverse, or rather to understand this is that it's saying that if you kill me, then I will kill all of you, right? So that's what a dead man switch basically means. So let's take a look at how this attack worked and what all did it expose, right? So first things first is that it has infected certain packages on NPM, right? So that is something that has happened. And then of course the malicious payload thing takes place. So we'll get to how the first infection actually happens, but assume that that has happened now. So let's get into like how the actual malware spreads and what does it do. So you see that the infected packages contain a modified package.json with a pre-installed script pointing to setup.bun.js. Now, if you don't know what a pre-installed script is, it's basically a script that you can configure that runs before the installation happens, right? Whatever command you're running, like npm install and so on. The loader script appears innocuous, claiming to install bun JavaScript runtime, which is a legitimate tool, right? So it has been named like setup.bun.js because for obvious reasons, like most people are not using bun, they're using node or npm to install these things. And if somebody even like looks it up just out of curiosity, they'll not be suspicious that something is going on here. So you see that in fact it does install bun. It's actually a legit bun installation command which runs here, and then it runs the actual malware, right? Which is this bun environment.js, which is the malware file. So the setup bun.js loader downloads or locates the bun runtime on the system, then executes the bundled bun environment.js payload, a 10 MB obfuscated file already present in the infected package. The approach provides multiple layers of evasion. The initial loader is small and seemingly legitimate, while the actual malicious code is heavily obfuscated and bundled into a file too large for casual inspection. So once this file runs, what happens is it starts to begin credential discovery, right? So it will start to see on your system where are GitHub tokens located, where if it can find any cloud credentials, if it can find NPM tokens, right? So it'll look into NPM RC files and environment variables, which are common locations. And whenever it'll find it, it'll keep on storing it. It also downloads and executes TruffleHog. So TruffleHog is a tool that can find, verify, and analyze your leaked credentials. So it'll download this and it'll run it on your computer. Right? It's basically using a security tool to figure out API keys, passwords, and so on. Now, the next interesting bit here is that if you take a look at this data exfiltration network, the malware uses the stolen GitHub tokens to create public repositories with specific marker in their description. Now, this is an extremely clever attack because if you look at this, it basically avoids creating a centralized server for attacker itself to post the malware content to, right? Because you want to take out the data, you want to exfiltrate that data, but you don't want it to be making some sort of fetch request or something, because obviously if you are making it that to a domain, that can be tied to an IP address, that can be tied to a domain purchase, credit card history, and you will expose yourself in some way. Like obviously you can just do all of that through crypto transactions, but there would be some way where either you would be blocked as an attacker or you will be just exposed, right? So instead of doing all of that, what it does is that it will use the credentials of the user itself to create a public repository with a certain description. So it will just publicly push your credentials, and the attacker most likely is continuously monitoring GitHub repositories with these descriptions, right? That's why it says like it's a marker for finding repositories later. Critically, if the initial GitHub token lacks sufficient permissions, the malware searches for other compromised repositories with the same marker, allowing it to retrieve tokens from the other infected systems. This creates a resilient botnet-like network where compromised systems share user access tokens. So if you look at this, it's pretty interesting because it's going to search GitHub repositories with the same marker. It'll download their tokens and it'll create a public repository from those tokens, right? So once you have like an initial set of vector repositories infected, it's extremely easy for you to just keep on going with this attack, right? So using the stolen NPM tokens, the malware downloads all packages maintained by the victim. So they would have figured out NPM tokens of certain authors. They will download all the packages. They will inject the setup bun script into pre-installed scripts, bundle the file, increment the package version, and then republish the infected package, right? Now this brings me to a very important and very interesting point, which I think a few months back I also shared on Twitter, is that why you should absolutely version lock your packages, right? Don't leave them on upgrading minor version or even patch version, I would rather say. Just actually version lock them very, very properly, right? And this sort of proves that. I mean, unless you were extremely unlucky that you actually upgraded the package in the same compromise window, chances are that if you're using version locking, if you're not doing a lot of business here and there, just randomly updating packages, you would have just not felt this attack at all. But you see that it will increment the package version number and then republishes the infected package to NPM. And yeah, that's basically it. So see, this is how the attack starts. That attacker would have some stolen NPM tokens and it will just keep on doing that, right? It will keep on spreading the attacks to different people's computer. Some of them probably are again authors of NPM packages, which will again, just start spreading the attack itself. So this is, for example, what it was actually uploading. You would see that the OX security team, which is another team that has found this, found about 28,000 GitHub repositories which contain the new Shai Hulud attack with SHA1 Hulud, the second coming, denoting the second attack this year, in every repository. Inside this, it has action secret, cloud, contents.json environment, and truffle secrets. Obviously, all of these files are now removed. All of the repositories are taken down, but each of them contained a double base64 encoded JSON with all of the compromise information attacker uploaded on the victim's GitHub account. The attacker also used the TruffleHog open source for secret scanning and uploading the found secrets to compromised accounts. So, I mean, you just use your own account to publish your own credentials on the system. I mean, that sort of is how this attack is played out, right? And if you decode this, you will see that basically everything, all of your environment variables and sensitive information, sensitive data would be there. So that's pretty serious. I mean, if you're infected with this, it's actually going to be extremely painful if you have serious workloads going on here and there and you have your development machine configured properly, and then suddenly, in an instant, you have just opened your machine to attack vectors. The attacker also used GitHub Actions Runner in order to connect to GitHub and upload new repositories in the name of compromised user. The attackers then used to create an exfiltration repository with the SHA1 Hulud, the second coming description. This is something that we have already seen. And you can see a list of packages that were infected with this. So you can see that a lot of Zapier packages are here. So if you're somebody building Zapier automations, you should be careful about that. But again, the problem happens is because there is a long chain of packages on top of these packages, which in fact uses them as well, right? For example, Mintlify, if you're aware about this tool, this is something that a lot of people nowadays use to create website documentation. In fact, Fermion's documentation is also powered by Mintlify. And you can see that Mintlify actually was infected, right? So they say like if you installed or updated Mintlify CLI between November 21st to 24th, please update it ASAP, right? Thankfully, we don't use Mintlify CLI, so I'm assuming that we are not affected with this attack. But it's serious, right? Because, I mean, I would assume like a lot of developers keep these CLIs and keep these tools very handy. So this is an example of a real package that you might also be using. Finally, you can see that this also comes with a dead man's switch, basically, which is an interesting behavior where it says that if the malware continuously monitors its access to GitHub and NPM for propagation and GitHub for exfiltration, if an infected system loses access to both the channels simultaneously, it triggers an immediate data destruction. Basically, if somebody's trying to, check the behavior of the package in an isolated, in a sandbox environment, then it will automatically just destroy or nuke that sandbox or that machine even. On Windows, it attempts to delete all the user files and overwrite disk sectors. On Unix, it uses the shred to overwrite files before deletion, making recovery nearly impossible. And you can see it's using bun all the way for doing its dirty work, and it's trying to, just erase everything that it can find. If GitHub mass deletes the malware repositories or NPM bulk revokes compromised tokens, thousands of infected systems could simultaneously destroy user data. The distributed nature of this attack means that each infected machine independently monitors access and will trigger deletion of users' data when a takedown is detected. So I mean, obviously it's a hot pile of mess. Having something like this being possible in the first place is extremely worrisome, and this is again not the first time this has happened with NPM, but this does make it extremely important that you lock your version dependencies as much as you can. Basically, my suggestion is that you remove all the way from, just upgrading even minor major patch versions. Just don't upgrade them at all. Just version lock them with their versions in package.json and keep a log file always. That's one thing. Second thing is that I would recommend not to update packages to their latest versions. In fact, PNPM was doing something around that, right? If I remember right. I'll share the link in the description if I find it. But PNPM at some point was discussing or was thinking about making it a default behavior that, hey, we would not allow you to update to a release which has just happened. So the release has to be at least like 7 to 14 days old, so that stuff like this can be detected and it can be mitigated if it's there before you actually install it, right? Which is like a very cool thing, but obviously you can't do that for every use case. Some people might have security patches and stuff like that as a requirement. But yeah, it's important to just delay on these things, right? Because it's just super scary for something like this to happen on your own system. And I mean, it could also be like a company ending event for a lot of these small startups, right? That's all for this one. Hopefully you learned something new. If you did, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.